I've come today to Scotland's National Marian Shrine here at Carfin to meet Alan Wilson, to talk about his son Joseph, who died aged 17, but still leaves a lasting legacy amongst the people with whom he lived. Alan, pleased to meet you.
Hi Kevin, how are you? Welcome to Carfin.
Thank you.
So here we are at Carfin. It's got a long history going back to Canon Taylor, who was one of the key people in getting St Therese sainted, and as a reward for that, this is a relic from St Therese that is permanently here in the little flower chapel. So it's a lovely place for devotion and a nice place to be.
And it's the National Marian Shrine of Scotland.
Yes, that's right. It was built, if I remember, in the 20s by a lot of migrant mine workers, and just carved out the whole place. I think it's one of these places when as soon as you wander in the front, you just feel this great sense of peace.
Yes.
And this great sense of spirituality.
Absolutely, I noticed it the minute I arrived. Now, I've come today to talk to you about Joe.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And tragically, you lost Joe how many years ago?
That's now 8 years ago. His anniversary was actually just yesterday.
That's right. So, tell me a little bit about Joe. Obviously, your son and your wife, I think, Veronica.
Yes.
What year was he born?
Joe was born in 1994. He was a lovely young man, and if you speak to anyone about Joe, his friends, his neighbours, even teachers, anyone he had contact with, you would get exactly the same story from him. He was such an engaging young chap, polite, I've got to say handsome.
Yes.
But he was very tall, 6'2". So he was the kind of person that if you were talking to him, he would find something in common with you to talk to you about, and he was really engaging. You would feel as if you were the only person in the world at that point in time. Mm-hmm. He really had, he just captured you. But he didn't impose his personality on you. He was more interested in you, and to find out what you were like your interests and whatnot. So really, really engaging young man. And he was also very devout in his faith. A lot of folk ask me the question, where does he get that faith from? And it was inherent in him. I know, as his parents, we've created an environment for it to flourish, but his faith was all his.
Yes.
And there was a few examples. If we go back to primary school, and if I think of the first parents' evening we went, this is primary one, so this is Joe at 4.5, 5 years of age. Mm-hmm. And his primary school teacher, Mrs. Henderson at the time, she said to us, your boy, there's just something really special about him. Do you know, at playtime, he goes out and he just looks around the playground and he sees who's not talking with anyone, who's not playing with anyone, who's not engaged, and he'll go over to them and make sure they're all right and get them involved in something or get them working. So that was very obvious from a very young age. But this is the place that we're in right now, the Carfin Grotto. It's, I've got to say, one of his favourite places.
Was it?
Yeah, we lived just literally across the road, and he would come and a lot of times with his mother and just wander around as we're doing just now. Yeah. And they'd be just chatting about the matters of the day and praying together and whatnot.
Did Joe have a particular devotion to Our Lady, Our Lady of Fatima, Our Lady of Lourdes, or something like that?
Not that I was aware of, but he was certainly a devotee of the Rosary.
Yes.
So he would say the Rosary often, and I recall Veronica will tell us quite often he would come home from school and he'd say, right mum, here's what's happened, come and say a Rosary with me.
Really?
Or his favourite prayer was actually the Angelus.
Really?
Yeah, so he'd pray the Rosary or the Angelus, and Veronica recalls quite humorously that quite often the dinners were burnt.
So he's a man of prayer.
Oh, absolutely. He was a sort of person you know, if we were talking and if you said to me, Kevin, you know, my aunt's not well, or, you know, or I've got, you know, somebody that I know could do with some prayers and help, Joe wouldn't just log that in his mind. He would actually stop and say a prayer right there and then for them. You know, just as we're kind of instructed to do. But he lived his faith absolutely. He wore it in his sleeve. You know, you just knew when you were talking to him, he was a man of God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is quite unusual, really, for a young man. How did his peers take to that?
Well, sometimes, you know, if you think of someone who's really holy, really devout, you know, you might think of quite a stuffy person, or quite a staid,
austere.
anything but. You know, Joe was life and soul of the party, very gregarious. There's videos that his pals have got him. He loved dancing and he loved singing. You know the expression, you know, sing as if nobody's listening,
Yes.
and dance as if nobody's watching.
Yes.
Joe lived that.
Really?
He really was.
Wow,
you
that's
know,
amazing.
so it's, you know, you put all that together, handsome, tall, really engaging. You know, what a guy we've got here,
Yeah.
and absolutely not afraid to show his devotion to God and show his love for God and Jesus and Our Lady. You know, he was very, very, very holy, but I say a really lovely person at the same time. Do you mind if I show you something just now, Kevin?
No, I'd be delighted.
Yeah, if we just go around here, this is a cave where there's plaques dedicated to a lot of people. And just here, not long after Joe's death, his school friends and the school got together and raised a bit of money to put a plaque up for Joe.
That's really, really nice.
So
that was his school pals did that.
yeah,
That's very touching.
It's a beautiful thing. And the other thing I should mention about the area that we're in just now, Joe spent 5 days in a coma when he collapsed.
Yeah.
The intervening Sunday, which would be the 18th of December, there was a really, really beautiful thing happened here in the grotto, and this kind of gives you a sense of what everyone thought of Joe. It started off with a couple of his pals said, right, we need to do something. Remember, these are teenagers that you're talking about, so it's very difficult at my age to deal with it, but as a teenager, you know, you just wonder how much more difficult is it. So his friends said, come on, we'll go to the grotto and we'll light candles. So they started off, yeah, there was like 2 or 3 or 4 of them, then a dozen of them, then it seemed to be growing and growing. So they then approached Father and asked if they could use the glass chapel, which will pass over there. It came from the Glasgow Garden Centre. It holds about 70 people. It became apparent that the glass chapel wasn't going to be big enough, so they asked if they could use the chapel, which they did. And the thing was, this was driven by young people, so it was all lay led. And in the chapel, they'd gathered, they tell me the chapel was full, so that means there must have been 500, 600, 700 people, you know, that sort of number. And they all said some prayers in the chapel and then came down here and just placed their candles in front of Our Lady's shrine, in front of St Therese, and all just round about here. There's photographs that we've got in this whole place. Remember, this is in darkness, and it was a -4, freezing cold night. And you see these photographs and it's just all lit up with candles from Joe. And it was young folk, it was neighbours, it was the whole community. You know, it was just folk getting together for Joe. Amazing. At the time that they did it, it was at 7 o'clock at night. We were standing around Joe's bedside, praying at the same time just to get a spiritual connection. The following day I came round to have a wee look, and the amount of candles that were there, and it wasn't just devotional candles, it was wee tea lights. But the whole thing was, the community that got together that night was just astonishing. My brother-in-law was here, and then he came over to the hospital, and he was just, you could tell by the look in his face, and he said, I can't believe what I've just witnessed. And he was so elated. You know, it was absolutely brilliant. So that probably gives you a sense of Joe. And as I say, he would pray all the time. And I think that that prayerfulness showed itself with his friends. was talking to some of his friends recently, some of his classmates, and they were saying, see if anyone had anything going on in their life, if there was anything happening in their life, Joe was the go-to person. They'd go and seek Joe out and ask his advice.
Really?
Yeah.
So he was kind of a leader amongst his peers?
Absolutely. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I'd give you another wee example of that. In his 5th year, which the year just before he died, he was a highly intelligent young man. He wanted to study medicine, so he achieved 5 hires, not just A's, but A band 1s, which is like 90% and above. So a highly intelligent young man. So at the awards ceremony in November 2011, he received the head teacher's award for general excellence, the sort of ducks as folk would call it. And I can remember at that event, the sports hall is, you're all laid out with chairs, and it's the whole school is there. And there's a wee video of Joe, just talking about some things, and then he comes up to get it's a cup, there he goes. Comes up to get his goat, gets it presented from the head teacher, and he stood there with a cup, and when he raised it, I'm reliving it just now, the whole place erupted. It wasn't, you would think maybe it'd just be his classmates. It wasn't, it was the whole school. The younger kids and whatnot. And I can remember thinking, my goodness, there's people love you.
Yeah. Yeah. Did Joe have a devotion to St Therese?
Absolutely. It kind of goes with being in Carfin.
Because this shrine is as much about Therese as it is Our Lady, it seems.
Yeah, you would say so. It was built for Our Lady of Lourdes, but Canon Taylor, who was the priest here, who Taylor High School, his school was named after, had a huge devotion to St Therese.
Mm-hmm. So what was Joe's sort of devotion? How was that lived out? Did he ever go to Lisieux, for example?
Yes, we had a family holiday, I think it was about 2008, where we went on a family holiday in the coast of France, and on one of the not so sunny days we decided we'll just drive inland, go into Lisieux, and followed in the footsteps of St Therese, her house, the basilica, the church that she was in.
Yes.
We went to the convent that St Therese was as well, in the Carmelites, and at the basilica, her parents' relics were there at the time as well.
Yes.
This was before they were sainted.
Yes.
But it was a fabulous experience, and I can remember we were all going up and you touching the relics and whatnot, and it was really uplifting. So your original question was, did Joe have a devotion to St Therese? Yes, a very strong devotion to St Therese. Yes. As I say, he would come here quite often with his mum and on his own, just to have a wander round, and you feel the peace yourself.
Is this statue a comfort to you, Joe?
Yes. It is. I mean, when you look at that and you see Our Lady with Jesus, I can't help thinking of Veronica when I see that.
Yes. I mean, it's not the natural order, is it?
No, it's not, and it's a very, very difficult thing. So this time of the year is just a very difficult time. When your child is born, what do you feel? You feel elated, and it's absolutely fantastic. It's the same when your child dies in the opposite direction. But also, when I think of Joe, you can go several ways with this when your child dies. You can go really down and depressed, and I'm not saying I don't get down and I don't get sad. Of course I do. Of course I do. It's a very natural thing to do. But the other thing I think of is, well, Joe was put on this earth for a purpose, and in his 17 short years he's fulfilled the purpose that he was given. And as a parent, I think to myself, well, you always want your kids to be happy. No matter what they're doing, you just want them to be happy. So if I could talk to Joe just now, and I could say to Joe, right, what would you like to do? Would you like to be here? Or would you like to be up there with God doing God's work? He'd tell me two things. He'd say, I love it up here doing God's work, and I'm just so happy. Now, as a parent, what else do you want for your child? You know, so that helps me personally when I'm in my lowest ebbs. So no, it's a lovely thing. It's a lovely thing. So he's very, very, very much part of the family still.
I notice we've got John Paul II here, but I think did Joe see a pope in his life?
He certainly did. He saw Pope Benedict when he came to Bellahouston in 2010.
Yes.
And oh my, in the lead up to see when they found Pope Benedict was coming.
Bellahouston is a large park in
Glasgow.
In Glasgow.
It's the same place that John Paul II came to in, I think it was the 80s.
That's right.
And the lead up to it, Joe was ecstatic knowing that the Pope was coming. Yeah, he couldn't believe it. And just really excited.
How old would he have been?
In 2010, Joe would be 15 at the time of the Pope's visit. And he loved it. Joe wrote in his diaries about that event, and he wrote, I'm trying to remember it word for word, he wrote, Pope Benedict is on the altar. That's the nearest to Jesus on the altar as we can get. Yeah. And his other words were, it would be buzzing ecstatic, absolutely brilliant. So much so, this is a 15-year-old boy, and in his diary, the wristband he had for the event, you know, to get entry, he's actually sellotaped that into his diary. Really? Yeah. So that shows you, that act alone shows you what he thought of it. And he also, just underneath the wristband, he wrote, you know the hymn, Let Us Build the City of God? Yes. So he wrote that immediately below that. But it was just a fantastic experience. And I actually remember him when I got home, and he was as high as a kite. Was it? Oh man, yeah.
A great day, aye. The whole family went?
No, just Joe.
Just Joe?
Just Joe, yeah. I think I was working. I was Episcopalian at the time. I only converted to Catholicism 2 years ago. Yes. So, and I think it was limited spaces. So, yes. No, but Joe was there with his school. Indeed. Thoroughly enjoyed it. That's great.
One of the things, Alan, about Joe is that, like St Therese, he left a diary.
Yeah, I did. It was a pleasant surprise. I was preparing for a memorial service that the school were having, and I was looking for inspiration. And I went up to his room, and I was looking around, and I saw school jotters. So I thought, I'll look at his handwriting, and that'll make me think about Joe and whatnot. And I started flicking through the jotters, and I'm starting to read, and I'm saying, this isn't business studies. this is his life, you know, and diaries, and it's the life of a 14, 15, 16-year-old, but all the things that go on in your life at that time. But the thread that came right through it was talking about his faith, and how when he needed help, the number of times that he would turn to God, he would turn to Jesus, or typically he'd say, I've just prayed a decade of the rosary there, you know. So it was wonderful to find. And I showed it to Veronica and Angela, and we just sat there and read and read and read, and it was just absolutely fabulous. It was Joe in his own words. Yeah. You know, and that's the person I could see, and there was a bit of me that was saying, I'm so glad that's there, because it's more than just your own memories. Yeah. You know, this is actually Joe talking about himself. Yeah. So it was absolutely beautiful. And after the memorial, there was a lot of folk. I used a couple of quotes out Joe's diaries at the memorial service at the school, and there was a few folks said, oh, that's really interesting, I'd like to know more about Joe and Joe's words. So with the help of the school, and actually with we got a great bit of advice from an old retired priest that we know is a very, very dear man to us. I said we should do something with it, so we picked out quite a few of the quotations in the school, put together this beautiful diary, or this beautiful booklet called Joe's Words.
Yes. And
that's now been, we started circulating it just to Taylor High School, to friends and family, and then more folk wanted a copy of it because they'd heard about it, and eventually the Grotto shop here held it for us. It's a free publication, there's no money involved, and folk just kept on wanting more and more, and we printed and printed and printed. We're now estimating there's about 5,000 copies of this have been distributed, and it's throughout the world. It's not just here. It's throughout the UK, Canada, Africa, India, Australia, Spain. I'm rhyming them off, but it's the places we've been asked for. It's just incredible.
It's a great example to young people.
Yeah. Just as we were walking down here into the sunken garden, we passed Our Lady of Fatima, and you get the young people there who had the fantastic apparition of Our Lady, and then the phenomenon just now that's happening. There seems to be an awful lot of young people being taken by God in their young years. Probably as an example, one I think of is Carlos Acutis, but I know there's an awful lot more.
Yes. Well, I suppose Therese wasn't that old when she died.
St Therese as well.
Or Bernadette.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're looking at all these young people and you're saying, well, there's a purpose to it. There's a purpose to it.
Yeah.
And if that purpose is to help others and to bring folk closer to God, then as I said earlier, if Joe was given that choice, if he was given the choice, you can stay here, Joe, or you can come with me and help people, he would jump at the chance of doing God's work. Veronica and I had a conversation with Joe 2 weeks before he died, and he said, look, I'm having a wee thought. He says, I'd really got a strong feeling that I want to help folk spiritually. And I can't help thinking that with God taking Joe, he's getting his wish. Yeah. He's impacting in a real positive way so many more people now than he ever could if he was here. Yeah. He was a great person, and lots of the testimonies from the folk that I've spoken to you about show that and demonstrate that, but I just can't help feeling that being in heaven and doing God's work, you can touch more lives in a positive way, and at a time where I think faith and church and religion really needs it. So from the diaries, there's then, a lot of folk have been praying to Joe and asking Joe for help, and folk tell us about, we'll call them favours that they've been granted. So we've now set up Joe's Faith, which is basically using Joe as the example and holding devotional events. We've now held 4 devotional events, all here in Carfin, and there's almost 200 people been coming along to each event. And we do a rosary or a set of prayers.
Yeah.
We've now added some hymns, and we do a wee reflection on Joe's life, on different aspects of his life, mainly focusing on his faith. But that reflection is now, it's been taken on by more people. There are so many young people come to these events, and it's really inspirational. It's young people, middle-aged people, older people, and just to see that the wide range of personalities that Joe's inspiring, or that they're coming out to see Joe. It's really, really good. And in the Joe's Faith group, it's nice to be able to bring some goodness to the world.